Good morning. Good morning if you're with us on the West Coast, our colleagues in Hawaii. Good afternoon if you're joining us from the other parts of the country. It's great to have you here. Thanks again for taking the time to come and learn with us. This has been an exciting opportunity for us to get together as educational institutions in San Diego and collaborate. While we wish we had you here in person to chat with us face to face, we do understand and want to acknowledge the unique opportunity we have to join virtually. So we really appreciate your time joining us today to learn a bit more about San Diego as an innovation hub. Just a quick reminder, the session is being recorded, so don't forget as we move through. Now, San Diego in general, when you think of the city, I'm sure you think of beaches and ocean and weather. And I know you've heard a great deal about that already, but we don't want to miss the fact that San Diego is already quite the innovation hub. All of the logos and images you see here call San Diego home. And not only does that offer our students some opportunities for exciting involvements when they're here in town, of course, it does offer our students a number of opportunities academically, not only for internships and job opportunities, but also the chance to learn from folks who are experts in these fields who reside here, who've chosen to make San Diego their home. So as an innovation hub, San Diego is at the forefront. There are many experts who talk about San Diego and what we have to offer as a city, and there are a couple of quotations that I think really sum it up best. On the next slide, you'll see a leader from Qualcomm specifically says that in San Diego, the culture is cooperative. You have the opportunity to learn from folks, again, who have already succeeded, and this collaborative environment is a unique part of San Diego culture. And then the CBRE highlights what makes San Diego different from other cities is this collaborative spirit. It's a startup hub, a startup mentality, and a mentality where folks are eager to learn and to grow and to share. It's not as cutthroat an environment as other opportunities are. So we're excited today. We've gathered 3 experts to share a bit more with you about San Diego as an innovation hub. Dr. Jim Dachant from Point Loma, who will talk a bit about the arts and humanities. Dr. Stephen Snyder from the Fleet Science Center, who will talk a bit more about science and technologies. And Dr. Michael Kollichman from the Center for Ethics of Science and Technology will talk a bit about the ethical implications and, again, innovation that's happening in that field. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dachant to share a bit with you about innovation in arts and humanities.
Well, thank you, Shannon. I appreciate it. And this is a quick presentation to give you all an idea of really the exciting things that are happening culture-wise in San Diego. Part of my role, besides being a dean and an art historian, is I'm an art critic and an art journalist. And so I get to cover a lot of the exciting things that are happening in the arts and humanities here. And there's just 5 slides and very quick and a sort of a way of highlighting some of these things. But San Diego is has quite a reputation for architecture. And this is important because it affects how we feel and how we understand our city. Sometimes it's been called the toolbox and thinking about the types of buildings we see along the skyline. But 2 simple examples here, the Salk Institute for Biological Studies, which Jonas Salk was the creator of the first polio vaccine. And this was a building designed by Louis Kahn, and he was charged with designing this a space that'd be worthy for Picasso to visit. And just right on the ocean, you can see this very minimal design that sort of seems like it extends forever into the sea. And on the right, on the campus of UCSD, is the Brutalist architecture of William Pereira. And this is the Geisel Library. And it almost, he was known for his futuristic design, almost looks like a spaceship as it's going up. But 2 really great examples. There's so many mid-century modern and descendants of Frank Lloyd Wright in San Diego. And of course, all our campuses have a number of architectural highlights. Next, I mean, not only on the outside of these wonderful buildings is we have so many cultural institutions, and this is a peek inside the San Diego Museum of Art. And the San Diego Museum of Art is an encyclopedic museum. It covers everything from prehistory all the way up to contemporary art. And you think about the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It's our own version. And San Diego Museum of Art is located within Balboa Park. And what's unique, this is one of the gems that we have here in San Diego. It's a 1,200-acre park that's really a cultural park, and it houses over a dozen museums, including the Timken Museum, the San Diego Art Institute, the Natural History Museum. There's a few theaters, an outdoor theater, of course, the San Diego Zoo, which is world famous, and a number of historic landmarks, and of course, restaurants and gardens, etc. But this gives you you an idea how rich just this one area is. Extending beyond the nonprofits and of course these larger institutions, we also have a gallery scene. And so I have a quick image inside Quint Gallery on this next slide. And Quint is located in La Jolla. And it's one of our higher end blue chip galleries. And this is a show featuring the artist Ryan McGinnis. But I show this to you that there's a level of tiers within San Diego, everything from the entry point into the very high end. So terms like pop surrealism or magazines like Juxtapose, you have those entry level galleries as well as these much larger established ones. Now, venturing outside the gallery system, what I think is very exciting is something called Chicano Park. And if you haven't heard of Chicano Park, it's world famous, and it's a park that's located underneath the Coronado Bridge. And what's unique about this is these structures, part of the on-ramp for the Coronado Bridge, was built through the middle of this community in Barrio Logan from 1963 to 1969. And essentially, rather than just let it divide a community, the local community, which was made up of Mexicans, Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans, decided to take over this space. And it was a non-violent takeover. And one of the ways they did this and expressed it was through painting murals that celebrated culture, but also celebrate the history of the neighborhood, of the culture, of the folks who lived within it. It finally became a National Historic Landmark in 2013, and you can see by the image that this is a place where there's community gatherings and festivals and all sorts of wonderful things throughout the year, but a really important cultural landmark that's hard to miss, and it's outside, and it's just part of the community. Extending beyond this, San Diego also is really well known for street art, graffiti, lowriders, and tattoo culture. And this extends all throughout San Diego. So when you think, we have a little bit of everything in San Diego, everything from Rembrandt at the museum to the very well-known artist Shepard Fairey and his murals. We have the headquarters, Tribal Streetwear, here located in San Diego, that's known for bringing all these subcultures together through their designs, but touching a little bit upon each of those areas. You'll notice that there's a number of nonprofits that curate street art throughout the city. One of the most well-known is Pangaseed, and they call them Seawalls. And basically they're trying to raise awareness for clean oceans. And so that's not unlike many other companies or nonprofits trying to create culture, not just inside, but culture that impacts us where we live and where we work. On the next slide, there's Liberty Station, and I'd be remiss not to mention this place. It's a formal naval training facility that's now a mixed development, and it hosts dozens of art studios, galleries, nonprofits, a few museums, and of course, there's a commercial sector there as well. But of note is it's also the home of IDW Publishing, which is a comic book publisher, which is known for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, maybe one of the most popular comic books in the country, as well as Doctor Who, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Gem, etc. There's also a comic museum there. So this is another one of those hubs. And I like to describe San Diego as a number of cultural hubs that's spaced out all along the county, from San Diego to North County, and we're connected via the individuals that travel in between them. And lastly, I really wanted to emphasize what San Diego is trying to do and where we're trying to go in the future. We just celebrated the inaugural Design Week for San Diego, and this was hosted by the Mingei Museum, and they hosted a few hundred design events throughout the city to showcase all the things that are happening within this industry. And this is not just graphic design. Of course, we have some wonderful industry players in graphic design and beyond, but design is a way of thinking and solving societal issues. And that's really what San Diego is trying to think of in a much larger sense. And the design community is thriving, and their collective goal is to be the design capital of the world in 2024. And essentially that is to make San Diego a better place to live and work by solving the big problems that are here. So that's just the very icing on the cake in terms of all that's happening in arts and culture and humanities here in San Diego. And of course, if there's any questions, happy to address them later in this presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dacian. It's always exciting to hear about the art scene in San Diego. Switching gears just a bit, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Steven Snyder from the Fleet Center, and he's going to share a bit with you about science and technology in San Diego.
So I love that the segue, perhaps inadvertent segue about solving the big problems. So that it feeds right into sort of the discussion here. So I run the Science Center here. So we have an interesting view of all the science, technology, and innovation that happens in San Diego. Now, when I first came here, I, as most people, thought of San Diego as, you know, a place that's got beaches and the weather, and there's weather and beaches, and the beaches are really nice. And by the way, you know, there's some really great weather. But what most people don't recognize is just the depth and breadth of science, technology, engineering, and innovation that happens here. So right now, if you happen to be dialing into this from a cell phone, the chip that's allowing you to communicate into the network probably comes and is developed here in San Diego. If you're on a laptop, the integrated circuit, the chip that's in the middle of your computer that's letting all this stuff happen, it's actually letting you process this, your processor, was built with light created from a company that was here in San Diego. If you've had a genetic test at any time recently, whether it's for, well, heaven forbid, COVID testing, or for a medical reason, or for, or even for ancestry purposes, chances are the sequencer that was used to do that genetic sequencing was from San Diego. And the list goes on and on and on, whether it's medical technology, biotechnology, communications technology, green tech, blue tech, every color tech you could possibly imagine. There are companies and innovations that are happening right here that are really the heart and soul of a huge network and has a global impact. And then on top of that, you have the added piece of all of the institutes that are here. You heard mention of Salk, you have the Scripps Institute, you have Sanford Burt and Prebys, all these different research institutes that look at everything from the ocean all the way through public health, all happening at the same time. And that's before you even get to all the work and research that happens at the universities. And obviously, if you're here, you're hearing from sort of four of the largest universities, but the system here is quite extensive. And the research that goes on is well beyond anything that I could summarize quickly in this kind of a talk. So I won't even try to do that, but I will tell you that the range is really phenomenal. And as a Science Center, this is an amazing resource for us, because if there's something we want to talk about, if something that's come up, there's someone in San Diego who can talk about it because they're doing research. Whether it's work on the microbiome in the human system to the microbiome in the oceans, whether it's observational astronomy or deep space cosmology, whether you're talking about data science or you're talking about engineering, all of that happens right here. So there's an incredible innovation hub that happens in San Diego. That's really quite remarkable. But for me, the thing that's so different, and I've worked in cities from the East Coast and the Midwest and here on the West Coast that I haven't seen really anywhere else at this level, is sort of I don't even know what the best way to put it, but it's sort of the approach that's taken and what these researchers, these brilliant scientists and engineers who are doing this innovative work, how they look and relate to the community itself. And so as an example, let me give you this quick story. Several years ago, we wanted to launch a program here at the Fleet called Two Scientists Walk Into a Bar. And it is just that. We take two scientists, we put them in a bar, they stand in front of a sign that says, "We're scientists, ask us anything," and that's it. There's no talk, there's no slides, they just stand there, potentially with a beer, by the sign. And for the first 20 minutes, they get funny looks. And then someone will come over and ask usually an off-the-wall question, and that opens the floodgates to people just coming up and they'll spend the next 2 to 3 hours just talking to people about the questions they have about science, technology, engineering, whatever that is, in bars. When we first started this, we thought, oh, this would be a cool program. We did a first test with me and one of our above board members, a couple of physicists to go out there to do it. And then we said, well, let's try and see, we'll go larger, and maybe we can find 20. We put just a quick call out. We had 75 scientists and engineers show up. So we did 25 scientists and 50 scientists in 25 bars all across the county on one night. And we said, that was great, let's do it again. And the next time we had 150 show up. Today we have over 350 scientists and engineers who actively want to participate in connecting what they do, the work that they do in the lab, the work they do in their offices, the work they do to understand and innovate and change our world, and actually have conversations with the community. And that's just one example of the kinds of programs that the scientist and engineering and innovation community is interested and engaged in doing. They want to communicate, they want to connect, and they want to do that in the community. And that's extraordinarily, extraordinarily rare. This means that from a student perspective, it means that, if you're looking to come to study and keep your head down the way I did when I went to graduate school, or I went to undergraduate, and learn and go deep, you've got faculty and areas and resources and innovation places that will absolutely take that deep dive. If you're coming because you want to go into engineering because you want to save the world, there are people who will support that as well. We just heard about IDW, and that's another great example, I think, of the kind of unique culture that's here in terms of the innovation culture. So IDW, we do a program with them called Comics Crossover, where science and comics collide. What we do is we take comic books and the writers and the artists who created these fanciful notions, we pair them with scientists who can talk about the real science that's going on relative to these topics. And what's been amazing about it is whatever the comic book creators can come up with, whatever science fiction fantasies they come up with, there's a scientist, there's an engineer, there's a company in San Diego who's looking to make that real. And whether it's robotics or cloning or time travel, we've been able to find someone who can come in and have that conversation. So one, that they're here, and the ecosystem, the learning innovation ecosystem is so broad and there's so many opportunities. And the fact that they're looking and willing to connect to the community is something that I've never found anywhere else. It creates a really unique innovation culture here, where we're doing a lot of exciting things are happening, but they're willing to connect, not just to the people in their lab, not just to their students, but the community at large. And that provides an incredible opportunity, I think, for anybody who's here and interested in innovation to come to San Diego and really wallow in a remarkably unique innovation culture. Oh, and by the way, the beaches and the weather are awesome as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Snyder. I love hearing about that. All right, our final presenter is Dr. Kalichman, who's here to tell us a bit about science, technology, and ethics in town. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. There goes my camera. So as you just heard from Steve Snyder, there's a lot of science and technology in San Diego, and it's exciting science and technology, which by definition means that we have a lot of challenging, interesting questions that come up, which is why this has been a perfect environment for the development of something like San Diego Center for Ethics in Science and Technology. You can go to the next slide. So this center started in 2003 when the man at the below left, Peter Ellsworth, president of a foundation that was funding research, noticed that some of the research that he was funding was controversial. Next. One example was a project at the Sanford Burnham Prebys, where they were working with mice, taking the embryos out of these mice and putting human embryonic stem cells into those embryos and reimplanting them in the mice. The result would be that the mouse would later have a new mouse born that would have human cells in it. Question was, who's talking about this? On the right, you see an example of something at this Neurosciences Institute, where they were using robotic-like devices that were being trained to learn. They were basically being developed so that they could learn to play soccer. Not that they were told how to play soccer. These devices would get better and better. As one of my colleagues said, they will get better and better, we won't. So this raised a lot of questions. Next, first, these questions include, what kinds of things should we be doing? These sound controversial and almost worrisome depending on how you look at them. How should that work be done? How should the results be used? These questions resulted in the formation of, next, the Center for Ethics in Science and Technology, which is now using this approach for a variety of programs. Go to the next slide. For an example, what is in the air we breathe, looking at climate change and the effect of pollutants in the air, building better batteries, how are we going to get technology that's going to be able to give us the energy we need? Selfish genes, this is about genetic engineering, changing mice, and what are the benefits and risks of doing some of that kind of work? Experiments on cybersecurity research, so now we're in the computer science area. Next is microbiomes. As Steve Snyder mentioned, we talk about microbiomes in the humans and in other animals. Ethical boundaries in research with human embryos, going back to the questions we asked early on with the Ethics Center. Next is, as an example, we had a very interesting talk on reconstructing human brains in the laboratory, taking human cells, putting them together to form the equivalent of a human brain. Next was a project we did with the International Society for Neuroethics here in San Diego, where we talked about the neuroethics of advertising. And finally, and most recently coming up, protecting privacy. Next slide. So this is, next again. This is where we have a speaker coming up next week on Wednesday, October 7th, Lucila Ono Machado from UCSD, UC San Diego. And she will be talking about the question of trying to get better data from medicine means that we have to collect information from people, means there are challenges about security and privacy. A fascinating area at the intersection of big data and doing what's right. If you'd like to join us, you can RSVP at ethicscenter.net and see what that's about. So the questions we have about science and technology are numerous. These include the following. What is the technology? What is the science? Second, why is that work being done? Third, does it work? Just because you say this is what you want to do, does it actually work and do what you say it wants to do? Next, how might that technology be used once it's developed? Next would be, what is possible? How far might we go with this? Are there things that are impossible? Are there things that we just won't ever be able to do? Next is, what could go wrong? We should be asking those questions up front, and that's one of the things we can do here in San Diego. And next, this is what we're doing. So our primary activity for the Ethics Center is a free monthly program. We convene those typically at the Fleet Science Center, except in the current environment because of the pandemic, we're conducting them virtually. So that program I mentioned before, anybody in the world can watch it as long as they're prepared to sign on for the webinar that will be next week. To date, we've have over 150 programs. These aren't just lectures. We engage the audience to identify and propose solutions to ethical challenges in scientific advancement. Over 70 of those programs have now been recorded by UCSD TV. They've averaged over 100,000 views each. So next is, what comes next really is your questions. And since I'm sort of speaking for ethics here today, I'm going to point out to you that it is your ethical obligation to ask some questions to help us frame better what you need to know and what the other participants would like to know today, or a question specifically about ethics and science. Be happy to answer those. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's a great segue into a general time of question and answer. So feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom to submit your questions. But we did have a few questions that came in throughout that I would love to highlight. And Dr. College-Man, while we've got you, if you don't mind answering a couple of questions, sorry to make you flip your camera back on.
I'll stay on.
I love it. Can you share a bit about an event that the Ethics Center has been a part of that's been especially impactful to you and your work?
Well, I hesitate to choose one. It's like choosing your favorite child.
Sure.
But what I can say is that what happens in all of these events is you have somebody speaking about cutting edge technology, cutting edge science, and the light goes on for members of the community who don't know about that science and technology. And then we start asking the questions. And sometimes the questions are very difficult and very controversial. We've had talks about vaccines, which is going to be a very important issue in the coming months and probably years, where some people are concerned that vaccines must always be bad. And other people assume that vaccines are always good. Well, actually, the reality is somewhere in between how we do that. And so it's that nuance that I think is the most exciting part of the programs.
That's great. And I know you also serve as faculty at UC San Diego. Can you talk a bit about maybe the role that you play with students and how that overlaps with the Ethics Center?
Yes, happy to. So we've actually started recently a plan where students at UCSD, even beginning undergraduate students, if they'd like to join us, be part of the Ethics Center, they can be parts of groups that work on various aspects of what we're doing, helping to plan programs, helping to get the word out, whatever they're up to.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm sure more questions will continue to come in, but a couple of questions for Dr. Snyder, if you don't mind rejoining us. Dr. Snyder, I know you're well established with the Fleet Science Center, and considering our audience today is counselors, independent and high school counselors, and some community college counselors advising students to potentially consider San Diego, can you talk a bit about how students can interact with the Fleet Science Center?
Well, sure. As I kind of alluded to in the talk, is there's this wonderful opportunity to connect with the community. So we have a whole range of things. So some of the students may be too young to participate in a bar discussion, but we have a whole series of opportunities that range from directly working with students, either on the in the building itself when the building's available, or in classrooms around the community. There's opportunities to work with students and families and libraries. There's opportunities for kids to participate in actually helping develop exhibitions and develop programs. We do a whole series called Fleet TV, which is an online version where we have, in particular, opportunities for students to talk about why they do what they do. If you're in science, someone's going to ask you, oh, yes, I remember physics. I hated that. But there's an opportunity to really connect and say, well, here's why. Here's why I'm passionate about what it is. This is why I'm studying this. So we really, our role at the Fleet is to find ways to connect this amazing science and technology resource we have, and students all the way up through faculty, and connect them immediately to the public any way that we can. And the public is hungry for this. They're interested and excited to learn what's been going on.
That's great. And in an earlier session, San Diego was referred to as a biotech hub. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe how San Diego earned that reputation?
Well, yeah. So early in sort of the biotech revolution, some of the first firms, the first companies here, and that emerged from the universities, from scientists at the university saying, oh, you know what, this research can translate into potentially medicines and treatments. And it's remarkable what it is now. It is in genomics, it is in medical technology, it is in pharmacology, it is in data. Obviously one of the big, all the recruitment for the large, for the really huge national study, blanking out on the study that Eric Topol is doing, is run from right here in San Diego. The growth has been really phenomenal, and it stretches. That's the thing. At one point, people were talking about calling this Biotech Beach, but I think that had made too many Annette Funicello kind of references to it, so they didn't necessarily go in that direction. But really, whatever area of biotech someone might be interested in, there is a startup or an established company working in here. And that's one of the great things, right, is at some point you get enough critical mass where the interesting people are moving back and forth between companies, they're moving back and forth between the universities, and this sort of ecosystem culture where everyone does work and cross-pollinate each other really creates a unique opportunity.
That's great. Thank you. Well, you alluded to it a bit earlier as well, kind of the collaborative nature of science and technology in San Diego. What do you think it is about San Diego that kind of blends itself to that, to folks being willing to kind of reach across the aisle and work together?
It's tough for me to say. I'm a New Yorker by birth, which means, hey, what are you looking at? And everyone here, everyone's so happy all the time. That's the thing, everyone's smiling. And maybe it is the weather. Maybe it is part of the thing. If you don't have to worry about being cold and rainy, you have more room. But I do think it's just, actually, I think the other big thing is that so many people in San Diego come from other places. We are a binational region. So this is an integrated, diverse, this is a very, very diverse place. And people are coming from all over the world, all over the country to come and work here. And so everyone's coming and leaving their networks and forming new ones. And just the way the city's work laid out and the way our events happen and sort of the culture that's here really engenders this notion of let's talk, let's meet, let's connect, let's network, let's figure out how we can do something new and different. And I'm not going to do that necessarily by talking to the person next to me. I need to talk to the person over there in that building who's doing something cool as well.
I love it. Thanks so much for that insight. Any insight on potential internship opportunities, not only just at the Fleet, but just in the science and technology area as well for students?
Oh, yes. And all of those companies, there are lots of internship opportunities. We talk about Qualcomm or Sony or Cymer, or there's a whole list that comes down. Internships are a big part of what all of those companies do. And then additionally, there are nonprofits here who are specifically looking to connect up students with internship opportunities to really kind of create that not the pipeline, but the multiple pathways we need to get there. I think the other strong thing is there are other groups here, supporting groups that support this innovation community. Things like Athena, which are really focused on women in STEM and how advancing their careers. And that's, again, everything from preschool all the way up through career. There are organizations and groups pulling people together to create those opportunities. So huge opportunity here as well. And, beauty here is the summer, it might get to 75. So. You know,
We're lucky.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to turn it over back to Dr. Deshant for a moment. A couple questions for him about the arts in San Diego. So Dr. Deshant, of course, when folks think of San Diego arts, generally Balboa Park is kind of what pops into their head first, but you highlighted a few other parts of town. What would you say is a can't miss neighborhood to experience the arts of San Diego?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's so many neighborhoods that not to miss. It's almost not fair, but each place, each kind of corner of San Diego County has something. So way up north, we have the Oceanside Museum of Art, which is a beautiful modern building that focuses on contemporary art, and the front windows open in true mid-century style, and the outside is inside. And if you were going further east, or actually, let's if you just go further south, just to La Jolla, and I think about sort of the mid-century architecture that's there. I think of Del Neghi's wonderful Bell Pavilion, which is almost like a James Bond villain house on the coast. And then as you go east, I think that's where you see a lot of the wonderful murals that are growing east of downtown. So, I mean, you can't get away from it. The Lux Institute's another wonderful one that's a little bit north of La Jolla as well, in the Encinitas area. So Googling San Diego art or San Diego Art Museum or galleries, there's almost too many. And there's a number of lists that you'll see publicized, and it goes on. And of course, you mentioned internships as well in a prior question. I mean, each of these institutions is always looking for folks. And we have many more nonprofits and arts institutions than we do universities. And so there's always a healthy supply of those types of opportunities.
I love it. What about the street art scene in San Diego? Is there a spot that you think folks should check out if they're here?
Yep. The neighborhood of North Park is a great place to walk around, whether it's the coffee shops or the walkability of it. And so for street art, you generally want buildings, large buildings, sometimes alleys, anywhere where you're going to get viewership. And so downtown, surprisingly, our downtown San Diego doesn't have a lot of alleys or places for that. So as you extend beyond where Petco is and some of the stadium, the smaller neighborhoods have the most. And I think that's where a lot of the personality of our smaller neighborhoods in San Diego come from, because you'll find local artists are involved in each of those areas, and or local businesses trying to support the arts and collaborating with so many of the street artists and graffiti artists, et cetera. So there's a number of maps as well online for those too. I mean, that's become an industry as well, to do street art tours.
Sure, I love it. Well, you mentioned a bit about Design Week in San Diego. Can you talk a bit about how students can interact with that? I mean, what is the perk of that being here for the many students in San Diego?
Yeah, absolutely. And so Design Week, when there were originally questions about folks trying to get a community of designers together, I interviewed each of the deans, each of the educators and leaders in the design areas in San Diego, and they were all told the same thing: well, there isn't a design community in San Diego. And then once they started looking around, they realized, well, no, there's actually hundreds, if not thousands, of designers in San Diego. They weren't organizing themselves in a way to form a community, because so many of them could work on their individual projects or their institutions. And so with Design Week, that purposely was to showcase all that's happening. And so each of the institutions that's represented here, as well as 100 plus in San Diego, submitted proposals on how to be involved in Design Week. And so whether they're working on bigger problems or issues that deal with the city or the country or the world, questions like, clean water, access to clean water, or how do you create a brand for Nike? What does that look like? What's a living brand look like? You had that sort of wealth of diversity in those presentations. And so even each of our institutions was involved in some of those presentations. Some of our students were involved in creating exhibits or showcasing portfolios and the types of work that are happening in our educational institutions. But what I love more about that is it's a way to connect. It's getting everyone to talk and to realize how big this design community is, and how much more powerful and how much bigger the questions we can solve if we work together, and if we're just aware of what's happening across town. So that was the first one. There's going to be more. And I think that's a really exciting thing. Think of San Diego as a design capital of the world. It's a really wonderful thing. But it's a lofty goal that a lot more needs to be done to showcase all the wonderful things. We can't just hide those things. So it's not too difficult for students to get involved, and most likely your professors at the various institutions were already involved, so they're already plugged in.
I love it. You've mentioned internships a couple of times. Are there a couple of internships that stand out to you, or maybe an internship opportunity that stand out to you that's pretty unique to San Diego that our students can take advantage of?
Yeah. Well, okay. One of the things I love about San Diego is it's a big city, but it feels like a small town. You know, it feels as though you can know everyone, and I think part of that's what was referenced earlier. There's a niceness to it, and I'm also from another part of the country. I'm from the East Coast, and so there's an accessibility, I would say, for students to walk in, to apply, to get in on the ground floor of something. And so while there are larger application processes for robust internship with bigger companies, so many of our smaller companies are about an introduction, about knowing asking a professor or asking a staff member, someone in your educational institution to connect you, or just saying hello, or connecting via Facebook or Instagram or whatever it may be appropriate. And I think that's what's really special. It feels as though you can make a difference, that you can get in contact with the field that you're interested in, and the barriers just aren't as large. When I lived in New York, walking into a gallery, it almost felt like they were doing you a favor by letting you in the door. That's not the case. I would say people actually smile to you. They would welcome you. And it's a really wonderful place to sort of get your foot in the door like that, and not feel as though you're taking anything away or you don't belong. And so I think that's what's uniquely special about what happens here. And like I said, there's so many opportunities like that multiply across. So the name one would be hard to do.
I love it. Thanks for trying to narrow it down, and thanks for the insight. I appreciate it so much. One last question for Dr. Kalichman. I failed to ask about internships. Can you talk just a bit about internship opportunities that are connected in your role and in your field?
Yeah, so there's two ways I'll answer that. The first one is that we, as I mentioned before, invite students to be basically ethics center representatives. We put out a call each year for students to join us. And we've had undergraduate students, graduate students joining us to be parts of different committees or subgroups that work on different aspects of these questions, from the science to the ethics to the logistics of our events. The second thing I'll mention, that I know about because of what we do, is at UC San Diego, and I'm pretty sure this is true of other institutions, these are the hubs that actually are the reason there is so much innovation in the San Diego community. These academic locations are the starting points, the catalysts for that. And what that means is the faculty in these institutions are connected often very directly to the companies and the organizations and the opportunities that are in the community. So what that means is there's a channel for a student to be an intern at any of those places by dint of being in these institutions, because the faculty they're working with are connected to those very places they might want to get a chance to learn more, to be involved, get an internship, and possibly get a job.
That's so helpful. Thank you so much. And thanks for your time today to all of our panelists. To everyone attending, I hope this has been exciting and inspiring for you as well. Echoing everything that our panelists have said, San Diego is an innovative city for so many reasons, but one thing that's so exciting to us is the ability to cross-collaborate. At any one of our institutions, you'll find faculty, staff, and students working with other faculty, staff, and students at other institutions, whether it's sharing research or formal connection, or a less formal connection where folks are able just to connect as a student in San Diego. So this is a wonderful spot and a place to innovate, even if that's not the first thing that pops into your head when you hear San Diego. So our next and final session is coming up. Our student panel will allow you the opportunity to ask questions to students. Each of the 4 institutions will be represented on the panel. We have students representing different majors, different hometowns, students from the United States and abroad. A lot of opportunity to ask questions for different students to really determine why they chose San Diego as their educational home, and hopefully help you as you're advising your students to try to find students that you feel would fit well here. So thank you again for your time today. It's been great to connect, and we hope that students from San Diego or students consider San Diego as their educational home as a result of the information you learned. Thanks again.